Mac. I'm the director of the Chinese Research Center of the ISF Academy here in Hong Kong. And today we have the honor of inviting Professor Antonio Panaino to give us a talk on a very interesting topic, namely Sirius, its mythology and iconography between East and West. So a brief introduction to Professor Panaino. He is a secular lecturer. He's a professor of Iranian studies in the Department of Cultural Heritage at the University of Bologna and at the campus of Ravenna in Italy. I had the pleasure of meeting Professor Antonio Panaino in 2017. We knew each other from before, but I visited Antonio in 2017, and I gave a lecture in his campus. So it's a great pleasure that we could reciprocate, and we have the pleasure of listening to Professor Panaino's talk on this topic. So just a reminder to everyone online, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat box on the live YouTube channel. We will collect the questions and then we'll read them out, and then we'll take them at the end of the lecture. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Professor Panaino.
Thank you, Professor Mac. Thank you to all the friends and the colleagues and the students interested in this subject. I will introduce my topic of today, explaining something about ancient Zoroastrianism, because the myth of Sirius in Iran, of course, is strongly connected with the Zoroastrian or Mazdian religion and with the Avesta, so the oldest Iranian sources about the most ancient religion of Iran. I'll switch on my PowerPoint so that you will be in the position to follow some technical information, some details also from the philological point of view. Just a moment, I have to, okay. Yes. You should see at the same time my image on the side and the technical information, some details also from the philological point of view. Just a moment, I have to, okay. Yes. I'm sorry, I hear my voice at the same time. On the side. Excuse me, Dr. Moran, I have an echo in my presentation. Is it fine?
It's apologies. The echo will disappear now. You're good. I'm going to turn off the microphone. Yes.
Just to avoid confusion. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry
You're
for
good to go.
the public. Sorry, but you are between two continents, very far, so something needs to be assessed. Okay. So I'll start observing that the Avesta, from which you can see here an example just taken from one of the most important chapters of this religious text. The Avesta is the sacred book of the Zoroastrians, but in reality it is a collection of liturgies. Unfortunately, we do not know where the Avestan people was located. It was just in Eastern Iran. We eventually do not know if Zoroaster, Zarathustra in the Avestan language, was an historical person or not. So in any case, we can say that the language and the liturgy of the Zoroastrian people, the people who worshipped Ahura Mazda and who were around Zoroaster, lived in Eastern Iran and in an area between the Gandhara and the Sogdiana and Khwarezmia, so the eastern side of Iran. In later times, so during the Sasanian period, probably around the 6th, 7th century, the Avesta, so this collection of text, was fixed into a volume, a kind of volume in order to be studied. And so we have 21 nasks of bundles in which the text was transmitted. Unfortunately, after the Arabic Islamic invasion of Iran, 2/3 or more of the Avesta were lost. I must recall that the Zoroastrian liturgy was an oral liturgy, and the scripture, the graphic, the textual determination of a text was something very late, more or less as it was in ancient India for the Vedas and the most ancient liturgical traditions of the Hindus. The most important moment of the liturgy is the yasna, or sacrifice. More or less is the same term of Vedic yajna. And in the Zoroastrian liturgy, it is very important the preparation and then the squeezing of a sacred plant, which in Vedic was called soma. In Avestan, it is haoma. One very important text, oral text, but it corresponds also to a liturgy, was the Videv Dad. So Dad, law, Videv, against the demons. So the law separation from the demons, which was a very important liturgy. Another one was the Visperad, all the worshipped patrons like Vishvedeva in Vedic. So it is an invocation to all the divinity. Just an example of surviving traditions of the Zoroastrian priest. Here we have two young student priests attending a worship in front of the fire. So Zoroastrianism is still a living religion, although the people who belong to it are relatively few. I just give a summary of the most important Avestan text. We have hymns or yasht, and for us, the yasht are very important because the most significant text concerning the star Sirius are contained in the liturgy of the hymns. So we have a yasht called the Tishtar Yasht, the yasht of the star Sirius, which is the 8th of this collection, and it is very important. We have a section called Hord Avesta, little or small Avesta, for daily prayer, and we have the greatest collection of liturgical text, which contains old and young or later Avestan texts. This is a dialectological and linguistic distinction. In any case, in the center of the liturgy of the Yasna, we have the gathas, or the songs attributed to the same Zoroaster, although, as I told you, we are hesitant about a purely historical reconstruction of the identity of this ancient Iranian prophet. What about the contents of the Zoroastrian theology? So, this theology changes from the oldest text to the Young Avestan text, and then in the Middle Iranian sources, so in the Middle Persian in particular, books of the 9th century AD, we have changes in the religion. So in the Gathas, in the Gathic sources, we have two spirits or two mindful spirits called Mainus. One is good or beneficent, Spenta, and the other one is Anra or hostile, bad. And they make a choice. They have to choose the verb var, or for Asha, which corresponds in Vedic to Urta, so the cosmic and true order, while Angra Mainu chooses for Druj, so the lie, the disorder. These twins are under the supervision of Ahura Mazda. So we have one great god, Ahura Mazda, and two minds, two spirits who make a different choice. Apparently, these spirits can be considered as twins and as descendants, as sons of the same Ahura Mazda. Here just you see a representation of the winged disc, which the old Persians used in order to represent most probably Ahura Mazda himself. In the Young Avestan text, we have an evolution. So if in the Gathas we have a sort of monotheism, so Ahura Mazda is on the top, and below there are the two antagonist spirits. In the later Avesta, the role of Spentamanu has been practically taken by Ahura Mazda, so we have a kind of radical dualism. Ahura Mazda is against Angra Mainyu, and in the Pahlavi text, in the later text, you will find the antagonism between Or Mazda, which corresponds to Ahura Mazda, and Ahreman, who correspond to the older name of Angra Mainyu. I insist on the fact that the Iranian dualism is a dualism not of spirit against matter. We will see that the Iranian dualism is a little bit more sophisticated, and I will insist on this. Manichaeans, on the contrary, insisted on a radical opposition between spirit and matter. So what is positive belongs to the soul, to the light, but it is intangible, while the matter, the body, the normal life are considered negative. For the Zoroastrians, this was an unacceptable doctrine. Why? Because for the Zoroastrians, there are two aspects of the existence. One is mental, called Manahya, or Manyawa in Avestan, and in Pahlavi it becomes Menog, literally mental. While another aspect of the existence is given with bones, so it's called Astuan. Why it is? Okay, is Astuant, having bones. But in later Avesta, it is called simply Gaetia, which means living, given with life. And in Pahlavi, it becomes Getik. So we have, to make things simple, not an opposition, but a different articulation of the reality. There is a dimension which is mental, and another dimension which is living. We have to be very, very careful because, for instance, in the Zoroastrian theology, demons are only mental. Demons are criminals. They destroy life, so they exist only as mental beings. In this way, Zoroastrianism completely transforms some antagonism between spirit and matter. Matter in the sense of life of the living desire to increase humanity and the nature is absolutely positive. And the positive divine word is mentally supporting the increasing of life, while the demons are just mental. In practical sense, Zoroastrianism considers evil as a kind of mental sickness. So what is wrong, what is dramatic in life, takes or has its origins in the mind. What happens in the body, what happens into the nature, is not something of strictly bodily or natural. It derives from the mind. So for these reasons, the positive creatures are both mental and living. So Menog and Getig, while the demons are only Menog. So the opposition, the dualism between the principle of life and principle of death, so between light and darkness, but also between order and disorder in the cosmos, can be seen already in the oldest text, where there is a direct antagonism between Gaia, which is life, from the verbal root G, and which you can find also in Sanskrit, and the idea of agiaity, which means impossibility of life. The representation of the antagonism can be seen in this 3rd century relief, where we have Ahura Mazda here and the king Ardashir, who has taken the power. Look, under the feet of the horses, you have, under the historical king of the Persians, the Parthian king, Ardavan. But under the horse of Ahura Mazda, of Ormazd, you have Ahriman. So there is a sort of translation of this dualism also in the historical level. Okay. According to the later cosmological text, in particular the Bundahishn, which is a big book of the 9th century AD, so it was written when already the Zoroastrians were living in an Islamic Iran. They were no more in power, and they were living as a minority in a Muslim society. We have a description of the cosmology. And according to this cosmology, Ormazd and his space, his religion and time were, are, and ever shall be, while Ahriman was, is, yet will not be. So it is a dualism, but not a deteism, in the sense that the destiny of Ahriman is considered hopeless. So at the end, he will be destroyed. Our reality, the world of history, is called Gumetzishn. So there is a period of mixture in which both armies, that of Ormazd and the army of Ahriman, will be mixed. And we will see briefly how this will happen. I must also insist on the fact that Zoroastrianism was one of the most ancient religion to transform the concept of time in something of quasi or semi-philosophical, in the sense that time is a creature of Ormazd, and Ahura Mazda, when discovers the existence of Ahriman, creates time, and from eternity he derives the limited time, so a sort of historical time. Time is an instrument because Ahriman will be invited to fight against Ormazd, and so to enter the good creation with his army. So Ahriman making an enormous mistake, will try to destroy the creation of Ormazd, entering this creation, and so he will be entrapped into a limited time and a limited space. Sorry if I should speak 1 hour in order to explain in details all this event, but I want you know some basic and foundational ideas of Zoroastrianism in order to frame the myth of the star Sirius and his role of a fighter, a divinity who continuously fights against the demonic creatures in the heaven. Within this theology of time, millenarianism was a very important concept. So the history of the cosmos, in the sense of the history of the fight between Ormazd and Ahriman, is divided in 2 big periods of 6,000 years each. And in particular, the second part of 6,000 years is that in which the Gumetsizhn, so the melange, the mixture, will take place. So Ahriman attacks the creation, enters it, and it is blocked inside until the Ahrimanic army, the forces belonging to Ahriman, who are or which are only mental, Menog, will be destroyed by Ormazd and his creatures. So this happens also because Ormazd is given with a knowledge a priori, while Ahriman has a pasdanisnish, so post-knowledge. Ahriman is essentially ignorant according to the Zoroastrian religion. Well, I will switch some other details because they will be interesting, certainly, but they will move us very far from the main point. I want to insist on the fact that at the end of the 12,000 years, Zoroastrians believe that one of the posthumous sons of Zoroaster will appear, and he will start the resurrection of death, and he will realize what in Avestan is called the frascio kereti, which means the act of making splendid the existence. In Pahlavi, this term was translated or adapted as frash gird, and this renovation of the world is not an apocalyptic event, but it is an apokatastasis. Apokatastasis is a Greek concept meaning a complete transformation and recreation of the world. So the world will be completely renovated, all the people will be saved, and all the human beings will be brought into the paradise of Ahura Mazda. Okay, so this is essentially a resume of a summary of the main points of the Zoroastrian religion. So we have to do with an ancient Iranian religion with some aspects in connection with the Indian or the Vedic tradition, in which one divinity, Ahura Mazda or Lord Wisdom, is the highest point of the pantheon, but still there are some divinities belonging to the past Indo-Iranian dimension. So you will find divinities such as Mitra, Anahita, and so on. And one divinity we will follow today is Tishtria, so the god of the star Sirius. In this context, the stars were considered divinities. So for the Zoroastrians, the stars, as the sun and the moon, are gods. In the Zoroastrian cosmology, we have 3 levels of heaven. There is a level of the stars, a level of the moon, and a level of the sun. On the top, there is another sky called the sky of the unlimited, innumerable lights. Probably it is the galactic level of the heaven. The planets were not known, apparently. We have no clear references to the knowledge of the planets. We can find in the text the name of few circumpolar constellations, so Hapto-Iringa and Hapto-Sru. Sorry, I repeated the name of the first constellation. So in any case, we find references to the Big Dipper and the Lesser Dipper, or Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. Of course, we cannot find references to the polar star because in the first millennium BC, there was no polar star. So it is nonsensical to look for what even in the astronomical geography did not exist. We have few other stars which were mentioned, like Satawaisa in Pachlavis Adves, Fomalhaut, Alpha Piscis Austrini, or Vanant, probably Vega, Pauiria Eini, which corresponds to the Pleiades, Upa Pauiria, probably the Canis Major. We arrive finally to the main point of our discussion of today. We have one text, the Avestan hymn to the star Sirius, which is Yasht number 8, called also Tishtar Yasht. Tishtar is a Pahlavi name. The Avestan name, technically, philologically, is Tishtria, written with 2 I, Tishtria. We can simplify writing an Y instead, but in the Avestan text you will find 2 I, Tishtria, who will fight against a demon called Apaosha. Apaosha is a demon of famine. So in this text we have a mythological event in which the star has to fight against a demon of famine. But there is also a second battle in which Tishtria has to fight against a demoness. This Pyrica means witch, is called Dujyairia, which means having a bad dus yar, a bad year, the witch bringing again famine in the sense of a bad year, bad harvest, and so on. So we have 2 battles mentioned in the hymn, one apparently between 2 horses, because Tishtria assumes the aspect of a white horse and has to fight against Apaosha, who appears as a black horse, and another one clearly celestial, astral, in which the star Sirius, as the commander of the army of the stars, has to fight against the Pyrica Dujyairia, but this Pyrica probably is the chief of an army of meteorites or bolids or moving astral bodies, which must be considered as belonging or representing meteoric showers which could take place during the period of highest drought or famine in the Uranian land, so between June, July, August, and it is in September that rains can back to Iran, and this means that Tishtria has beaten the astral demons. The bolids or the meteorites, the showers, are called staro-kurma. One who knows Sanskrit can recognize not only star as a name of a star, but kurma as kurmi in Sanskrit, which means worm. So staro-kurma is a compound meaning starred worms. So we have Pyrica. The Pyrica are the starred worms. The Pyrica represent these celestial enemies of the stars, and later this Pyrica will be called Parigan in Middle Persian. And it is interesting that the term Parigan in the later astronomical text will be used to mention the planets. So what can we deduce? Very briefly, the idea is that the ordered, clear, apparent motion of the fixed stars was considered as a witness of a regular change in the seasons. So it was something correct. It was a witness of the arrival of the rains and of the various phases of the year, while the presence of strange bodies such as the meteoric showers, bolids, comets, and so on, was considered demonic, was considered a break in the cosmic order represented by the regular motion of the fixed stars. Probably the role of the planets, when the planets were finally known by the Persians and the Iranians, was associated with the showers, with the bolids, with the meteoric bodies visible in the heaven. Why? Because the planets can have retrogradation, so movements which apparently seem irrational, not clearly explicable, and this apparent irregularity that we know can be explained with geometric and astronomical models was considered as a witness of a demonic presence in the heavens. And for these reasons, the Zoroastrians traditionally, when they discovered Western or Greek Hellenistic astrology, they maintained the divine role of the planets, considering them divinities, so the constellations were gods, while the planets were considered dangerous and mostly demoniac. Why Tishtria, Sirius, was so important? Well, probably the Iranians, like the Vedic people, had a certain interest in this star, which is so beautiful and so bright. And we have to observe the cultural background. So we know that in the Rig Veda, Tisya, which can be associated in Vedic, not in later Sanskrit tradition, with Sirius, is probably the cognate of Yavesta and Tishtria. But we can observe that Kaksiza, the arrow, as Sirius, was a very important star already in the Sumeric and the Babylonian tradition. Kaksiza, the arrow, is translated in the glossaries, in the ancient glossary of the Mesopotamian time, as Shiltahu and Shuhudu, which means again arrow. I want here to show you just what happened with the planets and why the planets became demons. So, in a certain phase in ancient Iran, probably in the Achaemenid period, the Persians, just as the Greek people, clearly discovered the existence of the planets. So they started to associate the name of the divinities which were the god of the planet with their own divinities. This is the case, for instance, of Marduk. Marduk was the highest divinity of the Babylonian pantheon. So the Persians said, okay, it corresponds to our Ahura Mazda. And the Greek did the same with Zeus. Ishtar, the divinity of the planet Venus, became Anahita in Iran as Aphrodite in Greek. Nabu, which was the god of the planet Mercury, was associated with Tiri or Tyria, and in Greek with Hermes. And this Tyria, like Hermes, was the god of the scribes, as Nabu was in Mesopotamia. The god Nergal, who had military and character, was associated with the Greek Heracles and with the Avestan Zoroastrian Vertragna. Kayav Manu, so the slow one, which is Saturnus, which is Saturn, was associated probably with Kronos in Greek, and perhaps with Zurvan, so the god of time in Iran. But certainly he was named with a Semitic name, so Kayav or Kayavanu became Kaivan in the Middle Persian text. So, and then Kevan, we can find it as Kevan. So this means that still at the end of the first millennium AD, the Zoroastrians were still using the Babylonian denomination of Zurvan. So this means that in antiquity, the Persians did as the Greeks. So they adopted the Mesopotamian cosmological associations of the divinities with the planet. We have a longer and a more detailed scheme of these correspondences. But in Middle Persian, the Zoroastrians started to associate these bodies, these astral bodies, no more with gods, but with demons, with astral demons. So we have a paradox. For instance, in the Pahlavi text, in the Zoroastrian text, when you find Ormazd, it is Ormazd the god, the highest god, when the text is referring to this divinity. But in an astronomical text, if you find Ormazd, this can be the demon of a planet Jupiter. So this is a paradoxical situation we have in the Zoroastrian text. Why? Probably because the creation of the names, of the associations between divine names and planets was created in the earlier period, following the model of the Babylonians. At a certain point in early late antiquity, between the Hellenistic period and late antiquity, the Zoroastrians, in front of the new doctrines of astrology, reassessed the interpretation, and they said, okay, the stars are God, but these planets must be associated with the older role played by the meteoric shower. So all these planets were called Parigan, like Pyrica, like the Pyrica Dugiaria, which was the name, who was the enemy of Tishtria in Avesta, and they played a similar role. Okay, some texts also speak of a cosmic battle when the history of the world starts. The planets fight against the major stars or constellations. So Ormazd attacks Haftoring, the Ursa Major. Tyr, Mercury, attacks Tishtar, as you should know now, is the name of a star Sirius in the Middle Persian text, in the Pahlavi text. So in the text of the Zoroastrians, in the Sasanian and later period. In any case, the name of the planets in Persian, in the Middle Persian, were, thanks to the Christians and the Manichaeans, associated with the days of a week, and these denominations entered other languages, so we can find them in Sogdian, in Uyghur, so you know it's ancient Uyghur, I mean, which is a Turkic variety of Turkish, and even in Chinese, and we have many references in the text of Turfan, Dunhuang, so along the Silk Road. Well, Iran is a contradictory country because the influence of the Mesopotamian culture and other cultures was very relevant. For instance, for the Zoroastrians, snakes are considered demons, but we have a text in Persian like the Mar Named, which is the book of a snake, which is an emerology. So every day you have to be careful. If you get out of your home and you see a snake, okay, stay home, or the second day, if you see the snake on the second day of a month, you can find a good wife. And on the third day, if you get out of your house and you see a snake, well, go to the market to make your business. So this is a kind of text which follows Babylonian, Mesopotamian patterns called omens. So you follow a classification of certain events, and according to an event, you deduce what you have to do in that specific moment. Okay. Now we can insist on the origin of the myth of the Arrow star. Why I say the Arrow star? Because, well, we know that Tishtria, as Sirius or Alpha Canis Majoris, is the apparently brightest star in the heaven. That the star Tishtria can be interpreted as Sirius is confirmed by a Greek scholar, Plutarch, of the 2nd century AD, who, in a book called Deiside et Osiride, which means about Isis and Osiris, in the chapter 47, says that the Persians worship a star, the star Sirius, who is the chief of the stars created by Ahura Mazda. And this is what the Tishtar Yasht, the Avestan hymn to Sirius, says in chapter 44 of his hymn. We suppose also, we assume that Vedic Tisya, which is a star in the Rig Veda, and this divinity, minor divinity or hero, it's an archer, appears in the book 5 or in the book 10 of the Rig Veda, probably corresponds to Tishtria, according to a suggestion proposed by a German linguist, Professor Forsman, in 1968. According to an etymological interpretation, we will see more in details, the star Sirius as Tishtria are in connection with 3 stars, so with the stars Delta, Epsilon, Zeta of the Orion constellation, so with the belt of Orion. And this arrow, this astral arrow, was called Isus Trikanda. So this was an arrow with 3 knots, which Tisya or Rudra was shooting against Prajapati. So this is Sirius, and he is Tishtria, literally tri-str, having 3 stars. This means that the name of Sirius was considered the one staying in line or in connection with the 3 stars, 3-star of the Orion's belt. And this in the Vedic mythology was Isus Trikanda, was the arrow with 3 knots. So we have an archer, Vedic Tisya, who was in line and for this reason named Tisya or the Avestan Tishtria with these 3 stars of the constellation of Orion. In reality, when you try to find Sirius in the heaven, the first thing is to look for the Orion's belt and to follow the line, an imaginary line of the Orion belt in the southern direction in order to look for Sirius. So this is another way of presenting the image. We have also to insist on the fact that Sirius in many cultures has been observed in its heliacal raising. So when early in the morning he was starting to rise more or less in proximity, in connection with the rising of the sun. You know, of course, that from the astronomical point of view, you cannot see the true heliacal rising, because when Sirius and the sun rise together, the star Sirius cannot be seen because the light of the sun is stronger. So Sirius disappears. But the heliacal rising was a very important phenomenon observed in many cultures. One in which it was foundational was ancient Egypt, for instance. So now we will see something of a little bit more technical. We reconstruct, according to the Indo-European linguistic, a name such as Tri-str-om, which will mean group of 3 stars. 3, you say here, 3. Str is star. Om is the thematization of this compound. Tri-strom, and M is the ending of a neutral stem. Tri-strom would mean, we have the asterisk, which means that this is a reconstruction. Tri-strom is the group of 3 stars. Given this theoretical compound, we can create a derivative form, an adjectival form. So in Indo-European, tri-str-yo. Tri-str-yo with S, this will be the masculine nominative, is the one who is connected with tri-strom, so with a group of 3 stars. And in Indo-Iranian, this tri-str-yo would become ti-str-ya. The elimination of this R is due to a dissimilation, so a linguistic phenomenon very frequent in cases such as this. So from tri-str-yo to ti-str-ya. You can ask me, why A? A because in Indo-Iranian, all the O, E, and A of Indo-European phonetics became A. In Avestan, this ti-str-ya becomes tishtria. So this E, I here, T, palatalize the S. So this S becomes sh, tishtria. And this is the outcome we have. In Vedic, we have Tisya with a cerebral S, which corresponds to the palatal in Iranian, which can be derived from Tishriya, so with an additional dissimilation. We have also to observe, because Professor Mack will be very prudent and he could observe that in reality, Pusya in Tisya and Pusya are a name of a lunar station, of a nakshatra in later Sanskrit text. And we know this, but it is the hypothesis is that the denomination of Tisia was switched to another star, to a nakshatra in the later period. So it is also interesting to observe that the idea that in the area of Sirius there was an arrow, an archer, and the target of an arrow and of an archer is something frequently present in very many cultures. So we have seen that Tisia or Rudra can be associated with star Sirius in their quality of archers. But we have seen that the name of Tishtria and Tisia can be interpreted as connected with an astral arrow. But also we have to mention the fact that in the Avestan hymn to the star Sirius, there is another myth. In this myth, it is said that the most brave, valiant archer of the Aryans, called Ereksha, has to shoot an arrow, and that the distance covered by this arrow will correspond to the land attributed to the Iranian peoples. The Iranians were beaten by another population, by the Turanians, and the two kings made an agreement so that the Iranians could vindicate and obtain a territory corresponding to the one in between the distance covered by this arrow shot by this archer called Ereksha. Ereksha shoots a very, very, very enormous shot of the arrow. The arrow flies for 1,000 kilometers, and then it is clear that this was a divine protection for the Iranian people. Ereksha dies after this heroic event. He is destroyed in pieces, but the text, the Tishtar Yasht, says that the arrow shot by Ereksha has an arrow, the head of the arrow was so brilliant as the star Sirius is brilliant. So we have a direct comparison between Sirius moving in the heaven and the arrow shot by the most brilliant archer of the Aryans, Ereksha. And this is the same idea that Sirius is an arrow, which we have found in Sumerian, where Sirius was Kaksiza. And in the Akkadian sources, the Babylonian sources, Kaksiza corresponds to Shiltahu and Shukudu, even in astronomical texts. So we have the Sumerian and the Mesopotamian people of Semitic language, which consider Sirius an arrow in the heaven. We have Iranians who say that Sirius is brilliant as the arrow shot by their archer. And we have Vedic sources from which we can deduce that Sirius corresponds to an archer, and that the arrow is Isus Trikanda, so the 3-knot arrow shot by him. In the Babylonian sources, this is the reconstruction proposed by various Assyriologists. We have with a different way of reading, but this is old and no more up to date. But in any case, Kaksiza is the arrow Sirius, and Mulban is the constellation of the bow. So for the Mesopotamian people, gigantic bow was visible in the heaven, and Sirius was the arrow. Of course, this representation is different from the Indian one, because it is different because Tisya corresponds to Sirius, and the arrow will be in the Orion's belt. But in any case, it's clear that we have in the gigantic area of the Orient some resonant interpretation. We have to mention also the Chinese tradition. We can compare it with the Mesopotamian one, where Sirius is not the tip of the arrow, but the target. And because the target is a celestial jackal called Tianlang, who is Sirius. Now we move to the west. In later Egypt, the Sirius as a divinity was called Sotis, and he was the target of the arrow shot by the goddess Satis. In China, we correspond the two extreme, the farthest points of the Oriental context. We have a celestial emperor who shot an arrow against the wolf of heaven, that's to say, Sirius or Tianlang. So, and this star was close and is close to the quadrant of the constellation on the bow and the arrow. So, even in China, we have a constellation of the bow and the arrow. So, this was the Dendera zodiac in the Roman Egypt, and here we have a constellation of a bow with the arrow, and I have a better representation. It's here with the goddess Satis shooting against Sotis an arrow, so against Sirius. We can see another representation. Sotis is here. Here you say the goddess, the female god Satis with a bow. So we have a very interesting situation in which, in the Indo-European framework and the Indo-Iranian area, we have an hero who is probably an archer, where one connected with the three stars, who becomes Tishtria and Tisya in the Indian framework. But in Mesopotamia, we have Sirius as an arrow, Kaxiza, even in Mesopotamia. And then we have in China Tianlang, who is the target of the bow, and on the opposite side in India, in Egypt, Sotis, Sirius, who is again the target of the arrow, of the arrow. I do not discuss this other part of these schemes concerning the relation between Mercury and Sirius, which are very complicated. Well, in your honor, I have tried even to collect some additional references to Sirius. So I found that in the treaty about the celestial duties by Shimatan and Shimahian, which belongs to the 1st century BC Christian era, it mentions the 4 stars of the bow, which are directed against the sky wolf, so against Sirius. So Sirius plays a certain role in the astral sources. And then the Sirius, the wolf of heaven, was a star that governs the omina of the aggressions, in particular the ones coming by a military foreign power. And for this reason, it was considered evil. So here is the opposite of Iran. In Iran, Tishtria was positive, absolutely positive. He was the protector of the rains and the water. But we have to recall that in the Greek world, it was considered negative, and that famine was considered connected with Canis Major, so with the star Sirius. Pancanier, you know for certain, who is a great American scholar working on astronomical sources in China, has remarked that this particular passage probably shows that some apparent changes in the color of the star, or that some anomalies in the appearance of Sirius, or which simply occurred in the celestial area close to it, were considered as signs of an impending military activities of foreign origin. So, and this can be deduced from the treaty about the celestial duties, which I mentioned before. I want also to recall the poem Don John, Lord of the East, from the collection Juget, 9 songs, where we find a fantastic description of the course of the sun, in which the star of the day was also meeting the sky wolf, shooting against him a long arrow. So also this, I think, is an important piece of reference. And I would like, before to conclude, to mention, you can see here the celestial map of Dunhuang, which is one of the masterpieces belonging to the cultural heritage of China. And when you have the opportunity to go to Dunhuang, I recommend, please go and apart the rocks of Dunhuang, you have a fantastic new museum where the presentation of the archaeological foundings is really fantastic. You can also observe this map. In the map, you have again the bow and the arrow and Sirius. So you can see the way in which the bow constellation was represented. So this about the map, the chart of Dunhuang. This was found in one of the Buddhist caves. It was found by local people around the beginning of the 20th century. The Dunhuang star chart is drawn in pen and ink, and it is very, very big, as you can see from its dimension. It consists of 12 panels corresponding to the 12 months of the year. So it is really something very, very remarkable. And the star Sirius, it is found on the map 6, corresponding to the fifth lunar month, which I have shown to you. You can find on the following map the Orion's belt, which was represented as corresponding to another month. I will switch to the conclusion because I have spoken too much. Just to say that I do not claim that this mythological representation of the arrow star is derived from just one culture, but I invite scholars and students to observe this incredible resonance. So we have the brightest star of heaven, which is in a way or the other connected with an archer, the target of the arrow, or with an arrow in proximity, in a direction or the other of that cosmic part of the heaven, with a big constellation of a bow. Various myths tries to classify, to represent a mythology in which the art of the archery, of bowmanship, seems to have played a certain role. On the two extreme directions, in China and in Egypt, we can find Sirius as the target of the arrow. In Mesopotamia, we have the constellation of the bow with Sirius as the arrow itself. In Iran, Sirius is the arrow, but his name seems to be the same of India, where the star could be associated with an archer. So I think this is extremely exciting and interesting. I have not a magical stick like Harry Potter to find a definitive solution, because we have no sources. But I think that to maintain this very impressive and large vision on the data can be useful. Of course, remembering that all these sources need to be studied and checked with the sources, that we need the collaboration and expertise of colleagues who are deep expert in the single subject, but that we have to dialogue and to exchange competencies and information. You have also seen how the stars were important within the Iranian Zoroastrian culture, that Tishtria or Sirius is a divinity. He is the chief of the stars who has to fight against the warm stars, against the demons of the celestial dimension, who tries to attack, to pierce the vault of heaven and to enter inside in order to bring famine and destruction. So the stars in Iran represented the cosmic order against other unpredictable astral beings whose motion is cannot be established a priori, which were considered demoniac and dangerous. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Well, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Professor Panaino, for the very exciting talk. As you mentioned, this is very much the beginning of the research and potentially very exciting discovery of the connection between ancient cultures. I think what is really fascinating that Professor Panaino just described is because of his expertise in Iranian culture, and he gave us a background of Zoroastrianism, and because of your deep understanding of the Avestan culture. And this is something that is not so accessible even in the academic world. And I received a number of years ago the thick thesis from Professor Panaino on this study on the of Sirius, and in particular the etymological investigation of Tishtria and its connection with the Sanskrit Tishya. And so there are a lot of really interesting interdisciplinary way to approach this study, linguistically, ancient culture, astronomy, and then from different cultures, we have to look at the sources and to confirm. And we also look at earlier some passages from Tianguan Shu, and some passages I have not thought about. You mentioned about the Quyan passage.
But I'm happy. I'm happy to have found something.
Looking at it just now, so this is very, very exciting because where is how they are connected? It could not be just a random coincidence that you have image of the jackal or the wolf, the heavenly jackal or the heavenly wolf, and then connected with the arrow. So these elements are all in different cultures, but in a pattern that cannot be so easily explained. Now I understand that there may be some question from the audience. I invite them to put in the chat box in YouTube. And meanwhile, I just gave a preview because I think Professor Panaino's talk is very auspicious, not just because of the star itself is auspicious, but because here at the ISF Academy, we have a whole series program on Dunhuang. So this lecture is kind of like a prelude to our Dunhuang program. And we hope that actually Professor Panaino would somehow be involved in our Dunhuang program, possibly come to this part of the world and to explore with us all the fascinating culture from Dunhuang. And I also want to mention that actually here in Hong Kong, there are a lot of interesting history, maybe much more modern, with Zoroastrianism. So the University of Hong Kong was one of the founders, or the key person who founded University of Hong Kong is a Parsi, Sir Modi, and of course he's a practitioner of Zoroastrianism. And if you come to Hong Kong and you ride across the ferry, ride across the Victoria Harbour on the Star Ferry, that star is actually connected with the Zoroastrian merchants. So there are some suggestion that maybe this star, we still have this star. Everyone would recognize this star in Hong Kong. It could have connection with the Zoroastrian astral concept. So all these things are interestingly connect to each other. Professor Panaino, is there anything that you would like to add?
But at the moment, I prefer to hear the questions by our public. Perhaps we can use the time we have for their curiosities or for questions. Of course, they can reach me eventually later by email. This is not a problem, but I will be very happy to speak of what they would like to know better, or on which I was not in the position to give sufficient details, because as you have seen, I have refused, I have compact in less than 1 hour 2 or 3 complete courses in my university. So perhaps next time it will be better to come to Hong Kong and to stay and to give a full seminar of 1 month on Zoroastrianism, if Zoroastrian studies can be felt as useful even for the history of your town, of your city.
Well, absolutely. I think Professor Ji Xianlin, a very eminent scholar in China, he mentioned that Dunhuang is the place where the 4 cultures encounter, namely the European or the Greco-Roman, and the Chinese, the Indian, and then the last one he mentioned, Islamic. But I think actually when you think about Islamic, there's the substratum of the Perso-Islamic. It's the Persian culture that has the impact to that part of the world. So I think this is something that needs to be broadcast, this academic understanding. We are still slowly getting there. So with your help, I think this we will have the better understanding.
I will collaborate, but I have also to say that in 2019, just before the tragedy of the COVID, I was guest of the Dunhuang Academy. And they organized a special meeting of 1 week on the cultural relations between Persia, pre-Islamic Persia, and China. So there is, and more than 300 persons were attending this summer school and the events connected to such a seminar. So I think the subject is interesting, and there is also a certain enthusiasm for it, even in Dunhuang.
Yes, absolutely. I was just in Dunhuang, and there were already some works between Iranian scholars and Chinese scholars. But before we move into other topics, there was one question from the audience. Let me just read it out. Okay. So the question is, are there other stars that have the same relationship, like what you were talking about, Sirius?
Well, unfortunately, we have only Sirius as a so prominent divinity. We have Vega, Vanant, the victorious one, who is mentioned with a minor hymn, with a minor liturgy, and this is considered a divinity who repels the demons. But in general, the role of the role as protector of a sky is attributed to Tishtria, to Sirius, as the chief of the rest of the starred army. Of course, in astrology, you can find a lot of references to the constellations, to the zodiacal constellations, but this belongs to the astrological literature. And an evolution of the Zoroastrian speculation concerning astronomy and astrology was in the care for the so-called Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. I mentioned, for instance, the importance of millenarianism. So the Zoroastrians were strongly interested in the time, and in the idea that time is limited. This is one enormous difference with respect to India, despite the fact that the Zoroastrian people and the post-Vedic Hindu people belong to the same Indo-Iranian stock, and they have many things in common in the terminology, in the lexicon, in the way of sacrificing, even in the names of some divinities. For instance, Mitra in Sanskrit and Mitra in a Western. But the concept of time is completely different. In India, as you know, we have a cyclical time. In Iran, you have a very strongly limited time. The time is the time of a battle. This time will end, and it will be mixed again into the eternity with a definitive and unique destruction, elimination of Ahriman and evil. So every millennium is very important, is very significant from the religious and cosmological point of view. And the Zoroastrians were obsessed when they started to discover the mysteries of astrology that a millennium can be even divided following the following collection, following repetition of conjunction of the two superior planets, Mars and Jupiter, Saturn and Jupiter, which can meet every, according to the a mean motion, not a true motion, but for the Sasanians, they met every 20 years. So this means that every 220 or 240, or in some cases 260 years, the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn were taking places out of a triplicity. A triplicity, you know, is a division of the zodiac according to the natural elements of the Aristotelic doctrine. So air, fire, earth, and water. So for 240 years, you have the repetition of a conjunction in the same triplicity. After 240 or 200, very rarely, 260 years, you have a shift of conjunction. So the conjunction starts a new cycle into a new triplicity. And this again for 240 or 260 years, until after 4 cycles, which take on more or less 980 years, so practically very close to a millennium, there is the shift again of the 4 cycles into a new big cycle. And all these events, these shifts, we are connected with dramatic changes in the history of the world. For instance, there is the conjunction concerning the birth of Christ. There is the conjunction concerning the birth of Muhammad, and the arrival of Islam. In Europe, until the Renaissance, there were astronomers and astrologers who had inherited this Sasanian doctrine, which through the Arabs entered Spain and the rest of Europe, who were trying to calculate the conjunction of the Antichrist, the devil, who would have been announced by a special dramatic conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. So this just to say the interesting role of astronomers in Sasanian Iran, but in this case the role was attributed to the planets, not to the stars.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting interface between astrology and then history and astronomy as well, because conjunction is an astronomical phenomena. But just before we go, we still have a few minutes, and I have two more questions, and from very different fields. Just so very quickly, we have just a few minutes for each. So the first one, it sounds like from a more astronomical side. So the question is, maybe someone was reading the Chinese, because in the Chinese passage, I think Sima Qian compare Venus to Sirius. So the question really is, in the world of the Western astronomers, do they clearly distinguish planets and bright stars? Because the Vedic astronomers don't seem to distinguish them.
Yeah, this is true. As Michio Yano, also a great Japanese specialist of Indian and Oriental astronomy and astrology, remarked, the Indians did not, so the Vedic people were not able to classify the planets. This doesn't mean that they did not recognize them or that they did not see, because I can see a body in the heaven, but I cannot, perhaps I do not possess a pattern of classification. So, for what we know, the Iranians never mentioned the planets in their text. So we actually do not know, and in my opinion, they were unable to understand the technical difference from the astronomical point of view of what is a star from what is a planet. Well, we have to consider that even in the time of Plato in Greece, it is clear that Plato, speaking with some persons, is in embarrass because they do not know really what the planets are. So this does not mean that you say the Greeks knew or the Babylonians knew. Who knew? So a very limited number of persons, probably. And in any case, in the religious text we have, the Iranian sources do not show that the planets were well distinguished. This happened, we have to presume this, in the Achaemenid period, because the Persians had the control of the intellectual life of Babylonia. They had good calendars. They started to improve some empirical and theoretical knowledges, and inevitably they were in connection with the astronomical schools of the Babylonian people. And for this reason, we have older names of the planets, which were demonized later. But it is also clear that when the Persians learned the existence of a planet, they did not put them into a negative classification. They probably did not know what to do. They said, okay, the Babylonians speak of the planet of Marduk, and we speak of the planet of Ahura Mazda, as the Greek used to name this planet Zeus. The problem happened later. So really, we cannot insist on a clear division or classification, in particular in eastern Iran. We have no sources directly emerging from datable sources and contexts. Thanks.
I have a very brief, this will be the last question, and probably this comes from someone who knows something about Indian astrology or astronomy, because you mentioned about Pushya.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, what's the connection? And I personally, I'm interested in this question as well, because Pushya is associated with the Buddhas. So the Buddha's birthday, the nakshatra, is associated with Pushya, but in Chinese is connected with asterism of Gui, which is not auspicious asterism.
I think the connection is with an asterism of a Cancer.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But what is it with Tisha?
Yeah, Tisha. So there is one big question from the etymological point of view. Some scholars have suspected that the name of the demon Apaosha, so the enemy of Tishtria, is Pushya in reality. This is one problem. So if this material belongs to a Proto-Indo-Iranian mythological material or heritage, this is one. I am skeptical, so I'm not sure that the Avestan demon can be connected with Pushya. But in any case, the idea that Tisya and Pushya are connected with the idea of floridity, of flowers, of something absolutely positive and against famine and so on, because Pushya has this inner meaning, well, certainly enters into the absolute positive vision of the role of the star Sirius in the Indo-Iranian context. So in the Vedic text, it is clear that Tisya is an archer, and he's playing a mythological role as an archer who is in charge to punish Prajapati, because Prajapati committed incest with his daughter, and so there is an astralization of this myth. So we have Prajapati in the heaven, we have the daughter of Prajapati, which is called Rohit. So she is a gazelle, she is a dar, I think, and in any case, a little animal, and all these members of the myth, of this story, are represented in the heaven. But in later times, probably there was a reassessment, and Tisya played a different role, because Rudra was considered the excellent archer, and so probably remained associated with Sirius.
Thank you so much. We can go on and on, but unfortunately we will have to stop. And because we enter into the fascinating world of world mythology and also comparative mythology, and this could be a lecture on its own. But let me thank you again for this wonderful lecture, and I will hope to see you again.
Yeah, me too. I hope to have other occasions and to develop our cooperation with your institute and with the activities you are chairing now. And so I wish you the best success in Hong Kong for the project you are chairing and developing.
Thank you very much, Professor Panaino.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.